Okay, we are back with another episode of the Rami and Vinny podcast. We have a guest today, Rami. I'll introduce the guest today, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So pleased to welcome Morgan Gross to our podcast. Morgan, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm going to do a little bio, and then we're going to dive right in. Morgan is the CEO and founder of Fundraising Beyond Borders, an international fundraising consultant who helps nonprofits expand globally. With experience co-founding a nonprofit and fundraising across Africa, she offers services like fractional fundraising and coaching to clients worldwide, aiming to equip international nonprofits with tools for confident global fundraising. You can find her at fundraisingbeyondborders.com and like everybody else on LinkedIn. But definitely check out the free downloads on her website, which I have been perusing of late. Really, really helpful and really, really valuable information. Morgan, thanks for joining us today.
Rami, Benny, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and dive on in.
Where are you joining us from exactly?
Yeah, so I'm based in Zambia, Africa, originally from the States, but I live out on a very, very rural farm. So you have to drive about 60 kilometers, or about, if we do hours like us Americans, about an hour and a half down a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. So very rural farm in Zambia, Africa.
Okay, so we're going to start there then. How in the world did you get there?
I know, right? I moved out to, well, actually, let me back up. My original background is in education. I was a second grade teacher in the States up in Missouri and was teaching and then co-founded a nonprofit in 2014 and had this third passion for travel. So I was loving fundraising for this nonprofit, loving teaching, loved to travel. And so decided to move out in 2016 to Zambia for what was supposed to be 6 months. 9 years later, I am still here. So I met my now husband out here, and he's a generational farmer. So we live out on his family's farm.
Okay, so I'm a New York, urban city New York kid. When you say farm, are we talking like animals? Are we talking orchards? What are we talking about here? Fields?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixture. We do a lot of crops, a lot of variety of different crops. We have about 400 cattle, and then we do just different animals for ourselves as well. And it's quite a large farm. It's a commercial farm, so we're really lucky because Africa, there is a lot of land. So we grow our own food as well. We have orchards as well for us. So like whatever fruit, and we just harvested the bananas the other day, and whenever we want to go out and grab whatever vegetables we want from the garden, we do that. But I too, I was a city girl. I'm born and raised in Dallas, Texas, so I knew nothing about this, nothing. So it's been a big transition, but I absolutely love it. It's incredible.
And now, how much time do you spend out in the field?
So not as much, obviously with my own company, that takes up a good chunk of my time. But every evening, my husband and I, we go around and drive around the farm. He's on the fields every day. So it's really nice to be able to walk our dogs around and see what's going on. And every weekend we have a couple dams and we're out on the boat and just exploring wildlife. And it's kind of crazy. You'll hear, and oftentimes, so I do apologize if you hear noises sometimes, there's monkeys jumping on our roof, or just like you'll hear guinea fowls in the background, or you never know what's going to happen.
I have never given that disclaimer to anyone
Yeah,
when I've been speaking to someone, that you might hear the monkeys jumping on my roof. Like, I've
I
referred to
know.
my kids that way, but never the literal monkeys jumping on our roof. No, that's never something I've said.
I know, it's a fun disclaimer for sure. So it's a fun fact too.
I'm going to ask one more, and then we'll let me dive in here. So, just in terms of the work, before we get
Yes.
into the specifics, how is living there like reimagined how you think about nonprofits and fundraising? And because you're obviously like coming from the States, but living like, again, all three of us don't live in the United States anymore. Living somewhere else always gives you a new lens. So I'm curious as to how that changed how you think about these things and how you see them from where you're sitting now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Africa in general, I said I traveled a ton before moving here, but Africa specifically has really made me slow down. And when I talk about slowing down, it's listening. And that's become a lot of who I am. So, it's listening to people, learning about new cultures, being really intentional about making sure cultural integrity is there in anything and everything that I do. So, with when I started Fundraising Beyond Borders, it's really important to us that were intentional of the context and the culture and where our clients are and where they're based, because it's so, I mean, it is incredible to learn about all these different cultures. Within Zambia alone, there's over 74 national language or 74 languages, right? So it's incredible that like you have to slow down and listen and learn. So I would say that's kind of that intentional slow down has reflected in everything that I do, both personally and professionally now.
We need a road trip, Ramey. We need a podcast road trip
Please,
to
please
Zambia.
come on through. We would love
Live
that.
from the farm. I love it. I love it.
Yes.
When Benny was introducing you, Morgan, I learned something about you. You and I have worked together before in different capacities, but I didn't realize that you started your own nonprofit. Are you still working on that now?
Yeah. So back in 2014, again, when I was in the States, we had several of our friends, and when I was back in college, several of our friends we had lost 2 people to suicide. And so by the second one, we're like, we can't just sit here and do nothing. This needs to change. A conversation needs to be started. There needs to be more resources, especially, because we were in university at the time. Resources at colleges needs to be increased. And so we started a nonprofit and co-founded a nonprofit called Project Wake Up. And so it was around awareness and increasing resources and tools to college campuses around mental health and suicide prevention. And so I'm currently no longer like actively involved, still support them, still love them, and they're doing a really great job. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey to watch them succeed. They have a full-length documentary out there as well that they produced to provide more education and prevention around the topic. So they're doing great.
And when did you realize that you wanted to move into to build something like Fundraising Beyond Borders?
Yeah. So, like I said, I moved out here in 2016 to Zambia. It was really unique because I got to use a lot of my background in education. And then, when you talk to fundraisers, you often don't hear people saying, "Oh, I want to be a fundraiser" when they're a kid, right? Like it's just not as common. So, at the time, I just didn't know that was even a job, right? So it wasn't until I was running that nonprofit and I found like, I've always kind of been a natural fundraiser. And, it's pulling out those strengths. What does a fundraiser even mean? Where it's storytelling and relationship building and all these different things. So I was teaching and running this nonprofit. When I moved out to Zambia, I got to design curriculum for a gender equality program and on the side fundraise. And they asked if I would stay full time, this nonprofit. And I moved down to Cape Town, South Africa, and ended up becoming their fundraising manager and got to again listen and learn. What was really unique about this nonprofit is they had volunteers from all around the world. And so I was working with Australians and like literally all around the world. So how do you storytell? How do you gather these international supporters where it's almost relevant to them, but they're supporting a cause in Africa that's going to be, completely different to what their home life looks like. And so ended up launching and several online campaigns for them, and they won awards. And people kind of just started reaching out to me. What are you doing? How are you doing it differently? And decided to go independent and support these nonprofits with some of the successes that I found back in 2016. I remember endlessly Googling, just trying to see all these tools and resources for international fundraising. And there was nothing at the time. There was nothing. And there still isn't a ton of things out there for international specific fundraising. And so I didn't want anybody to have to really go through what I had to go through, kind of those struggles. I wanted to be able to provide those resources and that confidence to succeed in international fundraising.
And in your business, they're all Africa-based nonprofits going international, or how does that explain the business to us here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fundraising Beyond Borders is twofold. So we have North America. So we say we are supporting North American nonprofits changing lives globally, fundraising to change lives globally. So they're based in America, 501c3 status, but they're fundraising there, but their money is going abroad. So their programs are international. So that's one arm. Then we do support South African nonprofits too, and a majority of them have international arms too, or they're wanting to go international and find international donors, usually specifically in the US or the UK. We've worked with clients all around the world. Right now, specifically, I would say about 70% of our clientele is based in Africa. The programs are based in Africa, but we've done Central America, South America, Australia, the UK. We've done a lot of different places, but primarily a lot of them programs are based in Africa.
What's you talked a little bit before about like translating languages literally, but also translating languages culturally. So what do you do? What do you see from donors who are in one place from another place, or for causes that are in one place from another place? How do they differ?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so important. I'm going to talk specifically about, North America or American donors that are trying to learn about international programs. And the key first is storytelling, right? So, well, and actually, I'm going to back up. So, storytelling is a big part of it, but it's also the very first key, and I always talk about this with any international nonprofit, is building donor trust, showing transparency and storytelling. So, how, as a international nonprofit, how can you welcome in American donors?
Interrupt this program. Just pause this. I don't know how.
Think,
Oh,
I think I'm
we
back.
lost it. We lost you for a second. You were
This is the
you were mid
noise.
sentence, and take a step back here. Building
So
donor
it's
trust. Where you were.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So really, what's key, when I talk to international nonprofits, is building donor trust, having your transparency and storytelling, right? So if you have an American donor, how are they going to trust that my dollar is actually going to where it's actually what you're saying it's going, because they haven't seen it in real life, right? So the first is building donor trust, then it's being transparent about exactly where that dollar is going to go, but then it's also storytelling. So a majority of those donors probably haven't been abroad and haven't seen internationally and haven't seen it in action. So how are you bringing that to them? There's so many different ways, right? But it's really clearly communicating that storytelling. Like, what does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it almost like taste like? But I think what's so key and what's so important to us is ethical storytelling. And how do you do that? So how do you make sure that culture that you're working with, these stories are coming from the people on ground? You're not changing them because you think it's going to sound better or a certain way. It's how are you keeping the integrity of the stories from on ground and working with the people in that culture and in that context.
And how do you do that? How are you doing that now?
Yeah, I think what's really key with fundraisers is working with program teams on the ground. So you're going to have to work harder and having those strong relationships. We do a lot of like coaching with program teams around like, how do you even gather stories? How do you gather photos, but still making sure that that integrity is there? And so, it very, very much depends on location, but oftentimes they'll bring out, phones and they'll video whoever they're interviewing so that we can make sure the exact words from the people are being taken in. And so it's kind of dependent on each country, on each culture, on each community that we work with. You're having to respect that. Some cultures don't like being videoed. Some cultures don't even have that technology yet. A lot of my clients are like very, very rural. So it's very client dependent, but it's thinking and working with the people on the ground, what is respectful, what is keeping that integrity of the community and the culture.
I want to back up and ask you about the transparency factor also, because I found that interesting. When you talk about transparency, do you mean things like, I don't know, like X number of dollars are going to specific programs? Like, is it a pie chart? Is that being transparent? What does being transparent mean?
Yeah, there's so many different things. Charity Water does an amazing job on transparency when it comes to social media. They have what they call Transparency Tuesday. And they, on social media, put up a story and they have a box and you can go on and ask any question you want, whatever you want. Then they screenshot it and then go and answer that question on their stories. And I think that's such a great way to be answering the questions that are coming straight from the potential supporters, right? So when it comes to transparency and what you're asking, what does that mean? It can be anywhere from like, where does my dollar really go? Does it go to programs? Does it go to overhead costs? Which that's a whole nother story about talking about, how donations support an entire organization. But then also too, it's like, transparency in learning about that culture, and transparency about behind the scenes is so critical to international nonprofits, is like really truly being authentic. I think that's what's really important. A lot of the nonprofits that I work with, we do a lot of Facebook Lives. And it's like, people are like, it needs to be perfect. Nope, it does not need to be perfect. Show the authenticity, show the people like what a day-to-day looks like. So that's also building transparency in behind the scenes and programming. So I think there's a lot of different layers and factors to it, but it's really just showing at the end of the day your authentic self as a nonprofit, who's behind the scenes, what the programs look like, what your staff look like, what the dollar breakdown looks like. And asking your supporters too what questions they might have about transparency too.
I really like that, because one of the things I struggle with, especially when it comes to transparency or data in general, is whenever you present data, you're sort of pulling people out of that emotional realm. You're making them think very logically. And I think as storytellers, as fundraisers, we want to appeal to people's emotions. We want to pull on the heartstrings. So I think having that balance of showing transparency, but still giving them that behind the scenes look that puts human faces to these numbers is a great way to bridge that gap. So that's really awesome.
Love that. I actually just sent out a newsletter to my community yesterday. And my tip for everybody was, what does your mid-year impact report look like? And when I say report, and this is what I said in the newsletter, a report does not have to look like a standard one-page PDF, but how can you, share those impact stats that are happening? So some of my clients we did a really cute postcard, and it was a scratch off. So then their donors got to kind of like actively participate. So it was like 6 bubbles, and then they scratched off the impact. They got to see the impact that was created. So you could do that. You can do a 2-minute video update. You can do a PDF if that's what you want to do. You can turn it into a video. So I think it is, Raimi, like when you're saying, that balance between, yes, impact stats are really good, and then also showing the stories behind who you're serving.
I'm curious, do clients get it? Are you fighting with them to get some of this done? I remember when doing the crowdfunding stuff that clients were very abrasive or very uncomfortable or very risk averse, and on many cases unwilling until you sort of, I wouldn't say beat it into them, but on some level got it through to them that they needed to do certain things that weren't the norm for them. If you're talking to an audience that's thousands and thousands of miles away, that perhaps the organization doesn't understand or appreciate or know. So how do you get that through to them that they understand and then go and do it?
Yeah, I think it's all about that foundational learning at the very beginning of working with clients too, and we always talk about this point blank, fundraising is hard in general, right? Fundraising for a national organization is hard, but fundraising for an international organization, it adds layers of complexity. And what do those layers look like? And it's breaking it down. You got to have that strong foundation of building donor trust, of transparency, of storytelling, and your clear communication and messaging. And so it's like, how do you start with those foundations? What does it look like? What can you do better to strengthen those different areas of your nonprofit? And I think and this is, we work primarily with smaller nonprofits, small to medium sized nonprofits, and it's chunking it down into what's like really tangible, what's tangible next steps that they can do to actually build that, right? Because it can feel overwhelming. Okay, Morgan, you're telling me all about storytelling. Like, that's like, storytelling has so many different segments to it. How can we break it? And that feels overwhelming to clients, but how can we break that down? And so, like, first thing that we do with clients is like, we're going to start with a story bank. We're going to create a story bank of 20 different stories from donors, from beneficiaries, from community leaders, from, whoever it is, and start there. And then we go on and build those foundational levels, because I think that's where you get client pushback. Sometimes it can feel just overwhelming. And where do I start? And I think too, with Fundraising Beyond Borders, we've created a really nice community. And so they get to talk with other international nonprofits and seeing that they're not alone in this. And yes, it's a little hard, but we're going to get through it together, and we're going to build these foundational items together. And then they start to see success. And that's where the confidence builds, and they see that they want to, continue to push and be successful.
Do most of the organizations you work with already have donor bases in the States, or are they more focused on donor acquisition?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's really split. One client I have right now has an incredible donor base, but they just didn't have the foundations. And that's what we came in to do. And, we're writing grants for them or just helping them with their monthly newsletters or, whatever it might be. But then a lot of them are smaller and they're needing that donor acquisition. And that's where we work with them on first step, who is your ideal donor? Where are they based? What do they look like? So it's creating that like ideal donor identification. And from there, what does donor acquisition look like? Which looks different for every organization. We kind of break that down of, donor acquisition.
And then you're setting the goals set based on that, right? So like, because but sometimes I find organizations look at other organizations and they want what they have, right? And then you're like, look, you're not them or they're not you. And so how are you working with them to set expectations that are right for them as opposed to right for somebody else?
Yep, absolutely. It's such a good one. And yes, you are very correct. And we call it the shiny object syndrome, where nonprofits are like, ooh, like this nonprofit just did a Facebook fundraiser. We should do the same thing. Or like a board member coming in, like, I saw these people doing a 5K, so that must be the answer to solve all of our problems and finding new donors. Whatever it might be. So every time that we work with a new client, we go through a 4-phase process. And the first phase is assess what's working, what's not working, what are your team's strengths, what are the barriers, what has been historically successes. Just we go through a huge assessment phase and then we clarify. And why I'm kind of going through this process to answer your question is we clarify 3, maybe 4, but usually 3 fundraising activities where we believe we're going to have a return on investment. Because especially these smaller nonprofits, you can't be good at everything. When you have one staff member doing all the fundraising, it's just not set up for success for you to be good at every single thing. So we're going to hone in on 3 fundraising activities where we're going to see the needle be moved. We're going to have that return on investment. And then we strategize and we create a fundraising strategy based off of those 3 different fundraising activities that we think actually that nonprofit's going to find success in. And so we found that really helpful because exactly like you're saying, Benny, there's so many fundraising activities or they see, this person doing something great. It's like, no, let's hone in for 12 months, be really good at it, and then reassess. And of course, you're going to be reassessing every quarter too, right? But in assessing and just making sure everything's working the way you want it to be. But you can't be good at everything.
That your time frame is like a 12-month thing. That's how you think about it?
Yeah, usually. Again, like I wish there was like a blueprint, like end all be all for every single nonprofit, right? But there's just not. So we typically work with clients on a 12-month basis and review from there. But again, every nonprofit is unique and different. And I think that's, what's so important to working with any type of client is you got to identify what's important and unique to them.
No, it takes time. It's not like you and I met through crowdfunding and peer-to-peer, which is
Right.
a different animal based altogether in terms of how it was set up and how we tried to do it. But the longer time frame or the longer time period, the 12-month period, makes a lot of sense. You're not going to see, generally speaking, the kind of change or the kind of impact in 2 to 3 months. It's going to take 6, 9, 12 months. So it's important for the organization to appreciate that that's true. But I'm super interested to hear you just say that, like we think about it in the 12-month time frame, we're going to be together for a year, get comfortable. So
Right. At the end of the day, fundraising is relationship building, period. Like that is what fundraising is. Relationships, it takes time. It takes time in order to build them. And so, in order to find that success, it's not going to be over in a quarter or it's going to be over in a month type of thing. And if that's the kind of the mentality you're going to go into it with you're going to struggle because it's just not a sustainable type of approach. If you're in it for the long run, you're going to find a lot more success.
I don't know why. Maybe it's because you operate in such a different world than what I'm used to in my very limited tunnel vision view. And everything you're saying makes perfect sense. Is there a way for you to give an example of when you've seen this unfold in a really successful way? You don't have to use the name of the organization if you don't want, but just I would love for you to paint a little bit of a picture of when this works well, what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And I'm like thinking of like, okay, what's the best one? Because like I can give so many different examples. So I'll give one kind of current client, and they are a fractional client. They are based, so 501c3 status, fundraising in US, and then all of their money goes to programs in Tanzania. So before, they were primarily led by a board. So they didn't have an executive director. It was really basically all volunteer work. They were doing quite well, though, I have to say, for the size. They were about $350,000 annual budget, almost $400,000 budget, and it was all volunteer led, which is quite incredible. And they just basically needed succession planning and said, for the sustainability of the organization, we need a fundraiser to come on and continue the fundraising side of things. And that's where we came in. And we went through that 4-phase approach. So we were trying to see what's working, what's not working. They had a lot of donors where they have great donors. They have really great supporters, but they're based in one location in North America, and they haven't had a lot of acquisition recently. And so their donor base was, in their words, they felt like getting stale. So that was kind of an issue for them. And then they just needed a little bit more leadership. They didn't have any foundations. They didn't have any project management tools. They didn't have a CRM. They did everything on Excel. So it was a lot of like foundational stuff. And then they didn't really have a public facing building donor trust transparency side of things when it came to social media. They didn't have regular newsletters, things like that. And so we've been working with them for about a year and a half. And the first thing we did, again, we went through that different phase approach. And the 3 different areas that we focused on for a year was foundations. We got to get a CRM in place. We got to look at donor communications. We got to look at the acknowledgement. We got to look at how we're building donor trust on social media and through those donor communications and newsletters and things. And then the second thing was donor acquisition. And that's where we brought in peer-to-peer, which was really great. So that was really successful. They had volunteers that would go abroad to their location, and so we honed in on that. So peer to peer was really successful, and that's one of my favorite donor acquisition tools for international nonprofits is crowdfunding and peer to peer. I should say specifically peer to peer fundraising. And then so that was like kind of our 2 biggest ones. And then we continued to do campaigns, but we just kind of modified it a little bit more, right? So we had a little bit more strategy into it. We had a digital campaign. Okay, we're not just going to send 3 emails and hope for the best. There was a lot more strategy of looking into, major donors, working with corporates, working on social media and our email newsletter. So we did a lot of segmentation. And so they have done incredibly well. They raised over $75,000 last year, more than they expected. And I was actually on a call with the board chair, and this is where I love where I get to do. She was in tears because she was like, it's just so amazing knowing that this organization is going to be sustainable, and it's been in great hands, and their strategy. And she doesn't feel overwhelmed, and she doesn't feel at loss of like, what do I do next? Where do I go? So I think when you have clear intentional strategy in place, yeah, great things can be done.
Wow.
Great example. I would love to actually know the name of the organization, but I'm not going to ask you here. But relatedly, I imagine because you're coming in and you're assessing and you're seeing all kinds of warts and problems and issues in an organization. So you've seen a situation, because I want to go back a little bit to the storytelling piece that you talked about before, where just simply slowing down really helped an organization get their message out better, just because they could now breathe, maybe, or whatever the technique you're using to get that story out and in layer. Just talk through that a little bit more.
Yeah. So actually, the first thing that we did with them, we built a whole new website for them, which is, I know, a big undertaking. And I didn't do the building. We, hired that out, but I helped with a lot of the messaging. And again, bringing in transparency, bringing in storytelling, and when you talk about transparency too, it's like what on your website, making sure this is so simple, but making sure your 501c3 status is on there. If you're registered in a different country, making sure that's there, showing your annual reports, using a reputable donation platform. So when somebody clicks to go donate, they feel safe and secure. So like there's so many little easy things that can be built on a website to help without storytelling and transparency. So first we did website. So I think that's a really big place, great place to start for clients, is going to review your website and what does that look like. Then social media. So we did a lot on their social media and reviewing their social media. Right now, we haven't done a lot to grow their social media, but what we have been doing is, again, just showing behind the scenes, continuing to build that donor trust. So when a potential grant funder or when an individual donor goes on to the website or hears about Reach Sharati and wants to go to their Instagram or, whatever it is, they can see that there's proof, right? They can see the action. They can have that there. So I would say those are like your two biggest places. And then newsletters. So like we don't do with Fundraising Beyond Borders, we don't do a typical quarterly newsletter where you have like your standard, like here are 4 great like segments of like updates that's happening. We do a lot of storytelling. We'll do behind the scenes updates, a day in a life. That's like one of my favorite things to do. Emails to send out to their email list is, what does it look like in a day in a life? So what does it look like from a teacher perspective or a healthcare perspective or a beneficiary perspective, and like really breaking it down from the time they leave their door to the time they're coming back to their door at nighttime. So it's like, yeah, it's really, I guess, just segmenting it into different areas where you are public facing.
And you do that storytelling in video format, the day in the life, typically?
Sometimes it just depends. So again, depends on the resources that a nonprofit has. Sometimes we do it on a Facebook Live. Sometimes we do it on a video. And then sometimes we just put it down we write it out and break it up.
Way. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. And we break it out that way. So I think I want to go to that too real quick is, sometimes when I'm working with smaller nonprofits is like, we don't have the video capacity. We don't have these cool tools out there, that other large nonprofits have access to. And I think it's so important is to meet the nonprofit where it's at. So if you only have, and you can only do written form, that is fine. Like start there, start small. There's really like no excuse in a sense of like, you can still find ways for your nonprofit, your small nonprofit to show up authentically. So it's just getting out there and trying it.
Do the Facebook Lives draw? Like, I'm so curious. Do they draw audience? Like, what are you looking to get out of the Facebook Live as an example?
Yeah, again, that one too depends. So Facebook Lives, again, are just an opportunity to show up for your audience and make it like just showing them that you're there and that you're not afraid to show up live and just catching people's attention. So that's one way. Some people go live and then save the video and then use the video for future things. So kind of is just dependent. Some people, it's just a good opportunity for them to practice, especially my smaller nonprofits, to just practice what it means to go live and build up that communication. So kind of just depends.
What struck me as you were talking is it would seem to me that for the average small to medium sized nonprofit, you think you said what, $350,000 budget, it's a pretty tremendous amount of resources. It's a big investment that's going into this restructuring of an organization, meaning a CRM. And I don't just mean the money, but also a lot of the things you introduced are time intensive, certainly to set up the system. Maybe once the system is set up, they're not. Is there resistance from the organizations that you work with to say like that's too much time, too much money? And they understand, yes, we need a CRM, but
Right.
At what cost, sort of thing.
Right. I think you need to meet them where they're at. I think, talking about the sustainability of building in these foundations and really showing them the long-term game. So it might feel overwhelming now, but, systems hopefully help you in the future. So many nonprofits come to us, they're like, okay, my donor retention rates suck. Or they come to us saying, okay, I need to find new donors. And we say, do you actually really need to find new donors? Or what does your donor retention rate look like? And usually it's that's the first problem, is like their retention rate is sitting at 10%. And that's where we identify that problem. And we're saying, okay, we can move this 10% to at the very beginning, at least 30% to then hopefully increased over 50%, because a CRM is going to help you with that. So I think it's really just breaking down okay, what are you trying to achieve with those foundations and with a CRM, and showing that return on investment, And you can always start small. So there's so many great CRMs out there these days. It's incredible. So you can start with this. It doesn't have to be like a Salesforce, like this really powerful type of CRM approach, but you can start small and then kind of work your way up to something.
I'm so curious. Can you just connect the dots for me? In general, broad strokes, how does a CRM, how would you draw it up so a CRM moves donor retention from 10% to 30%?
Sure. So a lot of them a lot of our clients, they like launch campaigns or like a peer-to-peer campaign or a digital campaign. And then they have no idea who gave, or they never thank them again, or they never keep in touch with them because they're overwhelmed with the data, or they don't have a system in place to collect that data, or they're using other tools out there that aren't giving them the information that they should be getting. And so the donors never hear from them ever again. And so what a CRM does is helps you collate, first of all, collate that information and then keep track of it. And there's even some CRMs where you can do emailing within the platform. So it's like, how can you then, okay, yes, CRM is a great thing. And then in tangent with it, you're going to have to get a donor, what we call like a donor engagement plan or donor acknowledgement plan in place. So, every month, okay, this is who I'm supposed to be engaging with, or I need to be sending out this email communication or whatever it is. So that's how kind of the CRM is like that first starting point to just getting organized, knowing who your donors are and when they were last communicated. We often say 3 to 1. So donors should be communicate for every one ask. There should be 3 what we call warm touches. So just making sure that's kind of like instilled in your CRM just helps you keep that in place.
3 to 1's aggressive. I like it, but I don't usually go 3 to 1. I usually have more touch points over the course of the year, but between asks. But I definitely hear that, and then I imagine, as Raymond actually were talking about this earlier today, just in terms of inputs and outcomes. So by just getting the systems right, getting the standards and how you operate up to an actual standard, that the expectation is that the results will show themselves if you put it in place. If you use it properly, if you follow the steps, then you'll see the outcomes. Don't think about the outcomes, just think about the inputs, right?
Right. And I think that's a really important piece that you're bringing up too is systems. Like, I'm obsessed with systems and they can be amazing, but only if you use them. So I think that's a really important piece to talk about is kind of what we were saying before is making sure whatever foundations or systems you're putting in place is actually tangible for your organization, because there's no point in putting all these things into place if you're not going to use it a quarter from now or a month from now. There's no, I've actually worked with or seen a couple clients where they're like, they get this huge CRM and they're like, okay, I know I'm supposed to, like, every email I'm supposed to, blind copy it in. So then any email that I send out, it goes into that CRM, and like, they don't often do that. So it's like just making sure you're kind of starting small of like, okay, these are the things we have to work up to. And it's training your staff too. So you have to put that kind of into the equation as well, making sure anybody that is going to be a part of those systems is actually properly trained. But boy, can it pay off. It can absolutely pay off.
Yeah, it does. I just don't think people, I think until you show it, they don't buy it, right? They don't, in terms of just like like Raymond and I for years talked to organizations about like a donor acknowledgement thing. We even gave it to them for nothing. And it just sat there like, oh, this is great. And they never used it. So it just died on the stump. It just never happened.
Yes. I'm actually working with a client right now that I've worked with in the past. And I did coaching with them about a year and a half ago. We graduated from fundraising coaching. They went off. I'm working back with them because they did a digital campaign recently, and it flopped. And the first coaching session we did was we reviewed what we did about a year and a half ago. And the first thing that came out of their mouth was, I know I didn't do what I was told to do. I didn't acknowledge and recognize my donors. I didn't keep up with that donor acknowledgement plan. And I'm back to point A. And there was they knew exactly what it was. They knew exactly why their campaign a year and a half later flopped.
proud of them for admitting it openly to you that they.
Man, I'm torn between wanting to ask you more questions about fundraising and more questions just about your life and how you live and your transition from being a city girl to a farm girl. So I'm gonna move to that just because I can't help myself. You also work across time zones. I don't know if you're still traveling. What does your daily work life look like?
What's one thing that your colleagues, let's say overseas, get wrong about international fundraising, like the work that you do? I think there's a lot of misconceptions and preconceptions and a lot of myths or things like that around it. So what's like one thing that really from your stand just jumps out that says, yeah, you got that. And what do people get wrong about Africa? I mean, I think a lot of things they get wrong about the continent, but like specifically towards the work, let's say. I mean, I know we're all messed up because the maps are wrong from when we grew up in America in terms of the size and scope of the continent, but just start with that. But just in terms of just the work itself as it relates to Africa fundraising, things like that.
Yeah, when you said you went to South Africa a couple times a year, I nodded my head like I knew what that meant or how you got there or anything like that. But I don't.
I only know a little more because my wife and I were planning a trip somewhere and we were looking at different potential destinations. So I know a little bit more about the map than I did, like, I don't know, if we had done this 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. So I actually understood what you meant when you said that. And I do know where you are. But I definitely, I was on a Zoom, we're almost out of time, but I mentioned it. I was on a Zoom maybe 4 or 5 months ago, something Africa fundraising related. And the only reason I went on, I was like, I have no idea. It's like, technically speaking, that close to me physically in terms of physical location and proximity, but I have no idea what's going on the continent. And it could be valuable potentially to know what's going on there. Same time zone in some cases. So it's even, possible to work in the same time zone, just 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 hours away. But, and it was fascinating to hear how much is going on, how many organizations and how many countries. You talked about languages, just and then sort of the idea that people dismiss or ignore or forget about Africa as a just anything, and so that's why I'm so curious about it, and that's why I think people get it wrong, just to get it wrong. Awesome. Okay, Morgan, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We're going to have you back because I think we left out most of your coaching work. And then we're going to have to talk about a road trip. So figure out how do we get the Ramey and Binny podcast, someone to sponsor the Ramey and Binny podcast. Traveling down to you on the farm would be amazing. Thank you so much. Take care.